Right, so everybody, I hope you can hear me well. This is the official beginning of the new season of our Wednesday webinars. Many of you, I recognize the same names, have seen some of the ones that we did earlier in the year. We took a break from the beginning of August, and we're now back up and running. So as from today, for the next few weeks, we will be doing webinars at the same time every day. So that's 1 o'clock in UK, 2 o'clock Central European time, much earlier in the morning in the US. Welcome anybody from New York. It should be about 8 o'clock with you. And welcome anybody in Asia Pacific. You're here with us in the evening. So that's the plan. We have some super interesting ones coming up, which Lizzie will tell you about at the end. But this is quite a special webinar for us on which to start. Firstly, it's an opportunity for us to welcome Paddy Loftman, who was going to talk to us earlier in the year, but for different family reasons, he couldn't make that day. But we were very keen that he should come back, and we're especially thrilled that he's kicking off the first of our series, because Paddy is talking about probably the most important topic for all of us over the next several years. And there's been a lot of time this year when the whole COVID-19 coronavirus has meant we're talking about very little else. And certainly it's been the topic of the conversation in the UK today with new restrictions announced. And we see, growths in Europe as well. So, expect us to keep on top of that and look how we as a company can provide, help, share guidance, share experiences as we go into wave 2. But the longer term thing that is going to be with us for much, much longer than the virus, however difficult it is of course climate change. This week is Climate Week. So many of you around the world will have seen news stories breaking. In the UK, we had a very influential documentary program by David Attenborough, the naturalist, talking about how climate change is not only about warming, but it also has huge consequences in things like biodiversity and the number of species that we are losing as a consequence of habitats being destroyed and the climate changing. I've been following the Cambridge University Alumni Festival this week, and we must have had 2 or 3 really interesting talks from leading academics, and one of their themes was how climate change is often seen as an opportunity or a kind of a requirement to lower the rate of growth of use of fossil fuels and other harmful activity. But they're pointing out it's not enough to slow the growth rate. You need to actually reduce the levels. So there's still a lot of communication work to do. And this is why we as communication professionals really need to have a point of view on this ourselves. We need to help our clients to develop that. Next week, we'll be joined by the founder of Future Fit, who one of his themes is how many agencies and clients and commercial companies and large corporates are looking at, picking one of the SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, whereas actually it's not enough to pick one. Everybody needs to be conscious about all of them. But how can we do this? How can we leverage this? How can we help our clients to understand this? This is why really we've asked Paddy to come. Lizzie will give a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll hand over to Paddy for the usual format. Lizzie, that's enough of me talking. Just talk us through quickly the housekeeping rules, if you can, and then introduce Paddy. By the way, everybody, Stephanie has not left us. She will be back next week. She's got an annual leave, but Lizzie, who's one of the team who's actually introduced us to Paddy right at the beginning, is going to be running the show this time. So she's the person that is going to moderate your questions. So smile nicely at Lizzie. Lizzie, over to you.
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, hear you now.
Okay, great. So yeah, welcome back. I did have a line about how Steph is not dead and she's just on holiday, but Julian said it for me, so I won't say that, but she is on a well-deserved vacation. So my name is Lizzie Gold. I'll be moderating this webinar. As you've seen, Julian's also on the call, and my colleague Paul Squirrel is here as well, if he wants to give you a little wave. So I'm just going to go through some housekeeping before I introduce Paddy. So in terms of timings, we're going to start with a 5-minute intro. Paddy will present for 35 minutes, and at the end we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session, finishing by 1:55 BST, so you can be ready for your next virtual appointment. As Julian said, please keep your microphones muted at all times. We'll unmute your microphone if we're calling on you to ask a question at the end. That being said, we would appreciate it if you could keep your videos on so our speaker has some friendly faces to present to. So as I said, there'll be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of Paddy's talk. Please send all your questions to me in the chat box. To do this, go to your chat and select to Lizzie Gold in the drop-down menu. If you'd like to ask the question to Paddy yourself, please let me know when you send your question to me by typing something like "I'll ask." I will then call on you to ask your question during the question and answer session. If you prefer me to ask Paddy your question, that's fine. Just also please let me know by typing something like "You ask." You should hopefully have your Zoom viewing mode set to speaker view. If not, just click speaker view at the top right of your screen. So Paddy will be sharing his slides on his screen. If you can't see his speaker window when his slides are on the screen, select Show Active Speaker Video. And if you have any technical issues, please message Paul Squirrel directly in the chat or email him at paul.squirrel@thenetworkone.com, and I'll pop that in the chat in a second. We are recording the webinar, so there's no need to take notes. If you prefer not to, feel free to just sit and relax and enjoy what Paddy is saying. In the unlikely event that the system crashes, please wait 2 minutes and log back in using the same link that you used to access this session this afternoon. Okay, so that's all for the housekeeping, and now I'd like to introduce Paddy. So Paddy is an independent strategist and speaker who spent the last decade working as a market researcher, innovation consultant, and brand consultant across a wide range of sectors, most recently as strategy director at Wolff Olins. He's now taking various steps to encourage action on the climate and ecological emergency, focused on the role business can play in transforming our economy. This includes working with the Climate Champions Office in the UK government and UNFCCC, as well as the Environmental Funders Network, a partnership between the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and the Green Economy Coalition, and giving this talk, which is adapted from the talk he gives for Extinction Rebellion. In today's webinar, Paddy will examine the perilous crises we must face in stark but human terms and consider the promise of solutions at hand. He will explore how new business and economic ideas offer a vision of a future defined by opportunity, not sacrifice, if we have the courage to grasp it. So I think I've spoken more than enough now, so I'm going to turn over to Paddy.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Julian. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen now, or attempt to. Let's make sure that's working. Can you see my screen, everyone? Looks good? Fantastic. Okay, well, yes, thank you for those intros. You've done a bit of my upfront job for me, which is excellent. We can get moving faster. I'm here to speak to you as actually mainly as a business consultant, I think. I wouldn't really describe myself as an environmentalist, despite working with people like Extinction Rebellion. I think this is something that applies to everyone. This is something we all need to be cognizant of and working towards, and it's our reality now, and I'm going to explain that as we go through. So yeah, as Lizzie was saying, I've worked for a long time really across business, innovation, brand strategy. One thing I'll just say on this, Wolff Olins in particular, we talked about being ambitious for our clients and optimistic for the world. I really carry that with me still. I am stubbornly optimistic and radically hopeful, I would argue. These are some of the things, some of the bits of action I'm involved in now where I still carry that optimism with me, that hope. And that hope is what Rebecca Solnit describes as the courage to embrace radical uncertainty and still keep moving forward. And that hope is a choice. Fundamentally, it is a choice between, it's a choice that takes courage, and it's a choice about what kind of change we want to have here. It's a choice between climate change or system change. And when you realize how perilous climate change is and how much promise there is in system change for better quickly, and that ultimately we know and have everything we need to do this. We know how to do this, we have everything we need to do it, and we can do this system change, and that becomes quite an easy choice to make. But that begins with facing up to this change. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, as James Baldwin says. The change we have to make to avoid the change that will otherwise come. And some things have already been lost to us. There are millions of lives that have been affected by climate change. We're starting to see it where we are, but it's been ongoing for people elsewhere for a long time. But we cannot get to a better place without facing the change that is still to come. And of course, yes, so we are talking about climate, even though COVID is currently, crashing all over us. Because ultimately, though, this is one system that we're talking about, as we'll see as we go through this. And this is a crucial moment for it. It's a turning point. We need to face the change that is coming, or it will overwhelm us. And so far, that's not what we've been doing. We've been in denial. We've been playing golf while our house caught fire. But that fire is becoming harder to ignore. It's getting closer to our doorstep. So today we're going to talk about the peril first, and then the promise. The peril of climate change, the promise of the system change. The peril is described by the science, which is conservative and very much not extreme, what I'm going to talk through. It's also mainstream, so it's quite likely that you'll know everything I'm about to say, and hopefully you will, actually. But if you do, then hopefully what you'll come away with from what I'm about to say is at least some useful ways of thinking and talking about it. And if you find yourself in denial during this, that's totally natural. Denial is not a position of ignorance, it's a defensive position. So it's worth asking yourself, if you're questioning things that I'm saying here, what are you defending yourself against? Just hold that thought in mind. We're going to begin here. I want you to just close your eyes, or not, whatever you want to do. Just imagine for a second your ideal world and what matters to you there. Because that's what we're talking about here. This thing, this planet of ours, is our life support system. It allows us to have those ideal worlds. It gives us the food, the water, the air that we survive on. And it's the only one we've got. Mars is a desert. The nearest Goldilocks planet, the sort of similar to Earth planet, is very far away, light years away, and you'd weigh 75 tons on the surface. So there is no planet B. I'm sure you've seen that slogan flying around. But this is not about saving the planet. That partly because we don't care about that, most people. Some of us, the more extreme-minded folk or people in Extinction Rebellion, that is what they care about, and they care very deeply about that. But most people care about themselves, and that's understandable. And that's okay, because that is what this is about. This is about saving us. And when I first started saying that in this talk, giving it for XR, it was quite a sort of unusual thing for someone from XR to say. That's actually now currently what Attenborough has quoted as saying on the front page of the Radio Times. So we're gathering an understanding about this reality here. But this is our life support system. And by doing what we're doing with the climate at the moment, we're basically hacking away at that life support system. So we've been doing this by, as we all know now, really, releasing emissions into our atmosphere, creating a sort of blanket around the Earth that warms it up. We've done it very recently. So 85% of the damage that we're talking about here in terms of carbon in the atmosphere has been done since 1945, and 50% since the first episode of The Simpsons aired in 1989. And that's a hopeful message, because what it tells us is that we've done this in a generation, really. So undoing it can be done just as quickly if we really, really put our minds to it with the courage and the hope that we're talking about here. What we know we need to do in all of this is try and keep to 1.5 degrees centigrade increase above pre-industrial levels. So before we started this process of releasing lots of carbon into the atmosphere, creating that blanket around the Earth, causing it to heat up and causing us the problems. It's difficult when we talk about these numbers. I'm sure you've seen them all over the place. They're small numbers, but they have very big impact. So we talked before about 2 degrees. That used to be the target. And the reason it's now 1.5 is because 2 degrees for many people is the end of their country. And the gap between 1.5 and 2 degrees, if we were to go in that direction, if we were to go between 1.5 and 2, and by the way, we're currently at 1.1, 150 million people would die from pollution alone. And that's, 15 Holocausts or whatever that number is. It would cost us $20 trillion to do that. It'd be 3 times the level of destruction in that 0.5 degree gap. And it's partly because these numbers are sort of misleading. So when we talk about 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, 2 degrees in many places is 10 degrees over land. So that's London at 45 degrees in the summer instead of 35 degrees in the summer. It's already been 20 degrees warmer in the Arctic than it is normally. So if you can imagine 45 degrees in London, even for a day, let alone a few weeks at a time, you realize that that's a real problem. This is where we're heading, 4 degrees, or 3.5 as some people put it now. And that is not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is sort of 8 degrees and unimaginable. But we are currently on this trajectory, and the government is preparing for this trajectory. And the thing we have to recognize is that that is not somewhere we want to go. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Basically, what's happening by increasing these temperatures is that we're leaving our safe zone. So if you look on this graph, which shows temperature over a very long period of time and fluctuations, that bit on the right-hand side where it says Holocene, that little sort of flat area, that's us, that's humans. We came into being and have flourished and had agriculture and everything else during that nice little gentle flat bit. And we're coming out of that into temperatures that we haven't seen for millions of years. The last time it was 4 degrees, there were alligators in the Arctic. So the risk that we face is that we simply don't know if we can survive that or in what form. It's not a case of new normal. It's a case of never normal again. The kind of fluctuations we'd end up in are very unpredictable, very scary. So this is what's happening for us. And at the same time as this, we're also very badly damaging our biodiversity, as Julian mentioned earlier. And I do recommend watching this, the Extinction, the Facts piece, but I would also recommend watching Attenborough's upcoming film, which is coming out soon. But basically what's happening is that we're killing everything really quickly. We use 100 billion tons of resources every year, which we draw from nature. And that's 80% over the sustainable limit, i.e. 80% over the amount that we can keep using, so keep living on the planet. If we carry on at this rate, you would need 5 Earths if we all wanted to live like Americans. And as we said earlier, we only have 1 of those, so we can't really do that. But basically this rapid increase in extinction of other things is a problem for us. It's not about the sad koalas and the sad polar bears, as sad as that is. I guarantee that some people are very sad about that. But for us, it's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because biodiversity, the wildlife on the planet, gives us stability. Without the biodiversity, we don't have stability. The true horror story is not one where nature comes and destroys us. It's one where we destroy nature because there's then nothing left for us. We don't have a life support system if it's gone. Basically, by destroying it, by hacking away at that life support system, we are sawing off the branch we are sitting on. And part of the reason this is happening is because we think of nature as a commodity, as something that we can just exploit and extract sort of until, well, infinitely. And coronavirus has revealed to us that we are not actually in this relationship with nature. We think of us as separate from it, that this is something we can extract from, but we're not. We live in an intermingled with it, in interconnected relationship. We have been shown this by all sorts of different sciences, whether it's quantum physics or system biology in recent times. We live in a very, very interconnected existence with nature because ultimately we are nature. If you count all the cells in the human body, only 43% of them are human, the rest are other things. So we need to stop believing that the natural world is there for us to take from for our own sake, not for the sake of the little cute animals, for our own sake. Because if we stop doing that, then the larder is going to be empty and we're going to die, putting it really bluntly. So that really means us thinking differently about what nature is to us, recognizing that actually it's our community. We share a quarter of our genes with trees. These are creatures that are our relatives, and we live in harmony with them and we need them. They provide us with the things that we need to live, basically. So we've sort of known this for a while, but we haven't been doing a great deal about it. 30 years of talk, 30 years of failure, arguably. That is the increasing amount of carbon in the atmosphere, as we said earlier, that warming blanket. And those are all the things, the big meetings that have happened to try and stop it. We've got another one coming up. UK is hosting it, COP26 in Glasgow next year. It's starting to feel like we might be able to change the direction of that upward graph, but it really is going to take all of us, and it's really going to take a lot of effort to do it. But why has this been happening? Why has that graph kept going up despite these efforts? I think one of the big reasons is that this thing we're talking about here, climate change, global warming, whatever we want to call it, has been a story. And it's been a story told only by a few people. Back in 2017, climate change was mentioned less often in the papers in this country than picnics, despite the magnitude of this thing that we're facing. So the thing we have to realize here is that actually what's going on here is that it's not a story, it is the setting within which all stories take place. And when we grasp that, it has implications for what we do in our jobs as marketers and consultants and communicators. It has real implications for how the whole of our culture operates. Because if we're not facing this constantly, then we're going to miss it. We're going to be in denial. That house is going to burn down. But that's really difficult for us to do, actually. Waking up to this is hard to do. Partly, there's a few things here. Our issue attention cycle is limited. So things like this come along and we talk about them, and then it feels like something's been done about it, so we forget about it. And it's possible that we're sort of on the cusp of something like that again. The other thing is that emergency inflation is a problem. So we keep hearing about emergencies, constant narratives of apocalypse and that, and people just kind of tune out of it because it's just too much. Can't deal with all of that. Fundamentally, our behavioral sort of makeup, what behavioral science can tell us about psychologically how we operate, reveals that we simply haven't evolved to deal with the kind of issue that this presents us. It's an invisible, typically delayed, gradual and distant thing. And we aren't really set up to cope with that. And there are a few things, a few little behavioral quirks that we can look at that sort of reveal some of this problem. We have the status quo bias. It's simply easier to keep things the same. So we'd rather do that than change. Change is difficult to do. It's hard, definitely, no question. There is the consumer fantasy, the idea that we've been trained with this by Apple and Google and everyone else, that someone else will fix it for free for me somewhere else. We'll get an app update. There is no app update for the climate crisis, unfortunately. That would be nice. There isn't. There is the optimism bias, the idea that it just probably won't happen to me. I'm going to be all right. We have a lot in this country. It's happening somewhere else. It's not happening to us. And we have hyperbolic discounting. So things that I'm concerned about now are more important than things in the future. I don't know if you've ever bought a packet of cookies and tried to hang on to them during the week to save some for the weekend and not managed. The same thing, but at a bigger scale. And the illusory truth effect is one that keeps me up at night. If we expose ourselves or are exposed to even very, very false information repeatedly, we gradually start to accept it as truth. And the deniers, the people who are pushing against us understanding this reality out of their own self-interest, are very, very aware of this. And it creates a problem as well called the backfire effect, where if you present someone with facts and they believe something very strongly, even though those facts might contradict what they believe, that actually just makes their belief even stronger. They might accept the facts at some level, but fundamentally they'll still persist in what they're already doing. And as I say, these deniers are very, very powerful. They run the world at the moment. Donald Trump, Putin, Murdoch, Bolsonaro. And they have a very, very clear way of doing this. There's a great book called Merchants of Doubt, if you want to investigate this further. But dismissing critics, distorting facts, distracting with other issues, dismaying audiences, these are clear tactics that have worked for the tobacco industry everywhere else, and in Russia in particular, in the way they run their politics. And they do it very, very fast, very constantly, with lots of money behind it. So it's very difficult for us to counter that, but we can. We just need to present better stories, better visions, which we'll talk about in a minute. So what does all this mean? I'm sure this, again, will be familiar to you, but I'm just going to do it through a little journey quickly, a journey of a child. So if you were to have a child today in their first year, and we didn't commit to sufficient action, and I really do think this is hopefully unlikely, but it's not something we can just go, yeah, it's fine, done. We have to stay involved in making sure that it is unlikely. 2/3 of UK CEOs now see climate change as a threat to their business. So this is changing. It's changing this week. Announcements being made this week. But let's make this assumption, we don't do enough. By 2050, it's 2 degrees. We've reached that 2 degrees. Those 150 million people have died in the process. We have longer heat waves. Heat waves are very serious. We don't like them. We have to go to the Lidos and there are queues outside and that's a bit rubbish and maybe we get in a fight. In Russia, there was a heat wave in 2010 that killed more people than died during a 10-year conflict in Afghanistan. So these are very dangerous things. 2 degrees is also uninsurable, as many people would argue in the insurance industry. And it's also genocide for many people around the world. And the big thing I think actually is that this sends a lot of people out into the world looking for somewhere else to live. The worst end of that spectrum, it's 1 billion people, which is the current population of North and South America combined. That is 41 people being displaced every minute. And not just being displaced, but never going home again because their home is gone. I think something as well in here is that we tend to worry about the young people. Actually, we should worry about the old people. Young people can run faster. So that's 2050, that's 2 degrees. It's not looking good. If we think about the damage that was caused politically and everything else by people moving from Syria, let's look at the magnitude of difference you're talking about when you have 1 billion people versus 1 million, 2 million. So moving forward, 2100, 4 degrees. Again, hopefully this is unlikely, but as I said, our government is preparing for this scenario. It has this sort of listed, the army is preparing for this scenario. And again, it's not even the worst case one. This is the conservative science at the moment. So at this point, it becomes really, really difficult. So damage done by things happening in the world costs double the wealth we have in the world. Much of life on Earth is gone at this point. That graph we saw earlier is continuing. Countries become uninhabitable because of direct heat or flooding. We have resources for less than 4 billion people. By then there'll be 9 billion people if we make it that far. Maybe as few as 1 billion people, some people argue. Global peace becomes very, very difficult in that moment. That's why the army are preparing for this. And basically societal collapse happens. So we sort of lose what we have now. Everything we understand around us is gone. We're not all dead necessarily. I don't think that extinction is an inevitable outcome here at all, but we are in a very different world that we probably wouldn't want to be in currently. Trouble with this is, do I care? I'm not going to be alive then, personally. I don't have children. I know people with children. Do I really care? The problem is this story has always been about that far away in the future. And the problem really is that it's now happening now. This has reached us now. That thing that felt really far away is now happening, as you are all very aware. It's happening all over the place. Floods in Australia, not only fires. And the true natural disaster story in California, where we see that real kind of wipeout of nature. Then again, though, that's not here, is it? It's not like outside my door. I mean, I know you guys are all in different places, but in the UK at least, it's not like there's no fire outside my door. Except that it is happening here in ways that maybe are less visible. Pollution now kills more than smoking, costing us £20 billion a year. Globally, it kills more people than malaria, violence, HIV, alcohol and drugs combined. And it also causes us to lose our mental faculties. Apparently, for men in particular, as they age with pollution at the levels we have, it's equivalent to a 20% gap in test scores. So that's you getting 50 instead of 70 on an exam. So it's very serious, and we do have things happening that are more visible. So the Welsh village of Fairborn has been decommissioned, vegetable yields are down by 50%, yada, yada. This is all scary, right? It's bad news. And what does it mean for your ideal world that you imagined earlier? That ideal world starts to feel a little less tangible, reachable. So what do we do about it? Well, this is no question the greatest challenge that the species has ever faced. It is much, much bigger than coronavirus. It is coronavirus times a lot. Coronavirus is an interesting experience for us to go through, and it's quite helpful actually for us to be able to recognize what we need to do next. So what do we need to do next? Well, as always in these moments, this kind of thing takes resilience, cooperation, and courage. As Darwin says, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. We actually misread him. Fittest doesn't mean strong. It means those who can cooperate. He's very clear about that. So what do we do about it? Well, one thing is that we can recognize that underneath all of this, and in fact, many of the other issues that we're dealing with in the world currently, sits our economy and the model that we have designed that we call our economy. And this is one perspective on it. The way our economic and political systems work must change or they will perish, brackets, and so will we eventually. We need a dynamic capitalist economy that gives everybody a justified belief that they can share in the benefits. And this is not some sort of wild left-wing point of view. This is the chief economic commentator for the FT, Martin Wolf. So we've built this economy, we've designed this economy, this is what's the challenge with it, based on fossil fuels. All growth arguably comes from fossil fuels. A barrel of oil is roughly 3 tanks of a car, is the work of an average human over 12 years. So it's been a massively powerful thing for us, no question about it. And we've thought of it as being very cheap, which it kind of is. It is cheap if you look at it financially. But what we've not done in our economic system is recognized the damage to nature that it causes. That cost we have not counted in. We've called it an externality and we've parked it. A bit like earlier, how we weren't recognizing that we are a part of nature or think of ourselves as apart from it. Our economic model is also in that space. We think of it as apart from nature, sort of somehow separated out, which of course it isn't. So we do things like fly salmon from Norway to China to be filleted and then back again to Norway to be consumed in stores, because that is cheaper, because it's financially cheaper to do that than to get someone in Norway to have a job to fillet it. But of course, when you think about that and you think about the pollution involved and the energy expended doing that, of course it's not cheaper. That's sort of mad. And by doing this, we're basically borrowing from the future. So what we've done is we've had a credit card. That fossil fuels have been a credit card for us, and we've been spending on it wildly and racking up this enormous debt that we now have to pay. And economics, translated, it means household management. And that way we've been managing a household has not gone so well, right? Things are on fire. But the thing we can recognize here is that economics is essentially a question of design. It's not fixed. A system is just people doing things, making decisions. It can be designed, redesigned, it can be reprogrammed, and we can choose to do that. And people are choosing to do that. And there's all sorts of models out there. And one of my favorites, and probably many others, is the donut. This is what, instead of the fossil fuel credit card, our economic design should probably be. It's an economy in service to life, as Kate Raworth, who came up with this, defines it. Meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. Rather than one where it means we need 5 planets, because as discussed, we don't have 5 planets, and avoids us going into that debt that someone further down the line is somehow going to have to pay. And this model means 2 things. It means recognizing, one, as we were saying, we are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature, and we rely on it. So having an economic system that sort of destroys it, which is what we currently have, treating it as an externality and costing for it accordingly, it's not a very good idea. We need to have a system that looks after nature, because that is us and looks after us. It's not about caring for it, looking after the koalas. It's about us and having a system that supports us. And this is something that needs better distribution of wealth and energy. As the guy who came up with GDP, Kuznets, said himself at the very beginning. And it means regenerating all of the things that we have that we rely on. Many people are recognizing this. People on the street recognizing that nature is vital for our health. It is, and it's at the level of our economic system that we need to realize this, and we are realizing it. The other thing is that we have an inequality problem. The way that we treat ourselves in our system is not very healthy. And right now, if you were to pile up everybody's wealth in little piles of dollar bills, most people in the world would be sat on the floor, just flat on the floor. Most people. Us here in our countries and in this call right now, probably at the height of a chair, somewhere there. The billionaires, the folks at the very top, are in outer space, according to that kind of measurement. And I don't want to bash the billionaires. They've done well in their lives, great, okay. But that kind of gap is not conducive to being able to run things effectively. Certainly not when Bezos is making 75% more on his wealth during the pandemic. These people have too much up there. It's completely unbalanced. And this is not me saying this is some kind of radical distribute all the wealth lefty type of person, because I'm not that. This is what's coming out of the mainstream economics thinking from Nobel Prize winners. Inequality at that level is a design failure. And we need to recognize that. This is not an ideological position, this is a pragmatic one. An unequal society at the level we have it means we can't make decisions effectively. So we can address that because we know what to do. We know how to deal with it. And in this moment, in times of crisis, seemingly impossible ideas suddenly become possible. This moment is the time to do it. This is a portal, as some have described it. This is a transition moment. And if we grasp it, which we know how to, then we can make good on all of these things we're just discussing. And people are grasping it. So University of Cambridge, their Institute for Sustainability Leadership is a brilliant set of courses. I really recommend them. Government, finance, business, how to reset our system. People working on that, they know what to do about it. We actually have most of the answers we need to solve this right now. Project Drawdown is a sort of collection of all of those things. And as they say, now is better than new. We don't need to innovate much, actually. We've got the answers, we just need to apply them. And everywhere you look, this is already happening. We just need to get it at scale. And this is a great film to watch to get a sense of some of that stuff. It's things like microgrids in Tanzania, or new jobs being developed in Bolivia, Bangladesh, and rewilding in this country at the NEPA state, because we know that rewilding pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and helps to balance that, reduce that blanket that's wrapping us up. And we're starting to have visions of what that looks like, because that's been a bit the problem. Like, well, okay, this all sounds like stuff we got to do, but like, what does that lead us to? What does that world feel like? And fundamentally, it leads us to healthier, safer, more fulfilling lives, imbued with more meaning. And people have thought about that. People have a good idea of what that looks like. We can't be certain. We can never be certain. And much of this is about bringing into being what we want it to be. If we believe in something, then it can become reality. So how do we do all this? What can business do to begin with? The first thing business can do, I think, fundamentally, is recognize that sustainability is not a sacrifice. It's not a stick, as we've been talking about for a long time. It's something that people are behind on, something they have to catch up to. It's like a big onerous task. It is, in fact, an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that needs to sit right at the heart of the organization, as businesses are now recognizing. They're putting this at the very center of their business model. It's not an agenda, it's not a side thing, it's right in the middle. And there's a lot of money to be made doing it. If we invest 300 billion, we get 2 trillion, that's 7 times return. Every pound invested in biodiversity is 4 pounds returned in social and economic benefits. This stuff is really, really powerful. This is the way forward. This is how we solve our problems like jobs. If we pursue the SDGs, Julian mentioned them earlier, 380 million new jobs become available to us. That's what we want right now, right, in this moment. And this is a recognition, fundamentally, that it's not about cost. And we talk a lot about cost. We tend to think, oh yeah, this is going to be costly. It's about investment. This is an investment which has a return, a very big return in every sense, if we can really go after it. So recognizing this point from Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the CBI, firms that act now will not only play their part in avoiding the devastating impact of climate change, but also steal a march on their competitors. This is a carrot, this is not a stick. This is about getting out in front. This is about being the next wave of innovation in the world and, you know, fixing problems in the meantime. So there are sort of 3 main things I think that businesses, your businesses, can be thinking about at your level, not just sort of the big business level. Make a plan to do this forever. That's the key thing. And that doing this means 0 carbon. And there are commitments. One of the campaigns I'm involved in, Race to Zero, is seeing massive, massive uptick in commitments to this. Eliminating the concept of waste. We think of throwing away. There is no away for stuff to go to. It just sort of gets into our system, and we know all the problems with plastic and everything else. So we need to get rid of that idea and recognize that waste is a resource in the wrong place. Reimagining success. Yes, okay, growth, but of what? And at what cost? What are we growing? What matters to us? What are the value sets that we all adhere to, and how can we manifest them in the work we do? And there are tons of organizations addressing this and helping bring people together and make commitments and support them. People are not alone in this anymore. They were for a long time. You know, companies like Unilever were sort of striding out, and that made people feel uncomfortable because, well, I can't do that. They're somehow amazing. But everyone is sort of getting on board with this, and it's changing really, really quickly. The thing that often comes back though on this is that customers don't want this, right? Well, customers, you know, my customers don't want this. How can I push this to people? And I think the question there is, well, has that been the case before? Pretty sure people didn't want to spend £1,000 on phones not that long ago and have their houses full of microphones, but we've got there. And part of getting there is marketing. So what can marketing do? What are we doing? The first thing is ask that question. Ask that question every day. What can marketing do about this? And recognize that you're not just selling products in marketing, you're selling ideas, you're selling stories that change the way people think, feel, and act. So what are the stories we want to be telling based on what values that we all care about and what future that we're trying to get to? Because those stories have immense power. People in the industry are addressing this head on. This is a great effort called the Great Reset, bringing together people around the idea of resetting the advertising industry to sort of find a pathway forwards out of COVID, out of the economic system we have, that keeps that industry again at the forefront, not lagging behind, not getting lost. The New Citizenship Project has identified something really fundamental that's happening. This is sort of spotting what's going on here, that we are shifting from being consumers to being citizens. And in addressing people accordingly, you change the way they respond. So when you talk to people as consumers, they're very short-term thinking, they're thinking about themselves. Talk about them as citizens, and that starts to change. They become longer-term thinking, they start thinking about more people. That's how we make changes here. Imperative 21 is a great effort that's just beginning in the US, led by the B Corp people, trying to kickstart that economic redesign. And they have some principles that are worth looking at. And this is just the beginning for them. Recognizing the key principle that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Revolution is a scary word, but in many senses that is what's going on here, but in a positive sense, not in a sort of tear everything down, smash everything to pieces, in a process of upgrading, moving us forward in a way that works. 2 books to check out on this. John Grant's position is really strong on this. He talks about being not bad and net good. I think it's really, really nice language. And Green Swans, John Elkington, really thinking about what is the new business model that's coming out of this? How does that start to look moving forward? So just to summarize a little bit for marketing, I think these are the key things, and there are obviously others, but celebrating healthy nature is really vital. I think people are feeling this, and trying to feed that into everything that we're doing helps to build that relationship with it, helps us to make that transition forward to a system, redesigning, reprogramming a system that supports us properly, i.e. that makes sense of our relationship with nature, the fact that we are part of it, and doesn't extract from it to the point of destroying it, and therefore us. It means engaging active citizens, active in the process of that redesigning and reprogramming, not just sort of blindly consuming through the world. And then selling better visions. Visions are so vital. They are what draw us forward and away from the crippling, unnecessary despair, and doing so speaking to people's values. And those are different. Looking at the moral foundations theory, for example, from Jonathan Haidt is a pretty good place to start on that. Really understanding what matters to people and reaching them on that level. Because ultimately what we need to do here, with a sort of overarching message, is recognize that we can't talk to people about better than the apocalypse. Not really, it doesn't work. Certainly sort of ordinary people wandering around, because how can people focus on the end of the world when they're focused on the end of the week? So this is about better than today. And the reality is, as Christiana Figueres, the architect of the Paris Agreement, said here, most, if not all, measures to address climate change actually bring better quality of life. We end up healthier, we end up more fulfilled, etc., more meaning in our jobs. So this is what we need to be doing. The question, of course, that comes up now is, isn't that expensive though? That looks like a lot. It will cost a fortune, said the dinosaurs as they tried to stop the meteorite coming towards them and failed. I'll just spend a second here looking at this. I'm not going to zoom in on this page, but we'll zoom in a second. This is a really interesting thing to look at. This is the graph of all the trillions in the world, the trillions of dollars floating around. And if we zoom in a little bit, we get this picture. So the cost for the entire planet to eliminate almost all carbon emissions sort of permanently and historically is $53 trillion. It's actually 70 I've taken out the 20 that comes back in benefits. So that is the net cost, 53. That tiny little yellow square is the 1.2 trillion that it would require for us to do it in Europe. And that 158 is the total wealth of 1% of the population. 1% of the population that owns 40% of the world's wealth. So, and when people ask the question, how can we afford this, or we can't afford this, when they say that, the question back to them is, who do you mean by we? Especially when you look at this picture. To meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, it costs way less than the amount of money that the world's wealthy have hidden down the back of the sofa. The money that they don't even need to access. So in quick summary, we know a few things. We know that if we don't do enough, by 2050, we will have displaced the population of North and South America, perhaps, and killed lots of people in the process. And by 4 degrees, by 2100, we will basically have lost what we understand around us as our society. And we will exist somehow, but it won't be some way or somehow that we're probably very happy with. We need to recognize that nature is our community, not a commodity we can just exploit relentlessly. And that's for our own good, not for the sake of the cutesy animals. And we need to recognize that sustainability is an investment opportunity. It's not a sacrifice. This is where we're going next. This is the new, blue ocean, blue sky, etc. And this is the setting for all stories. We really, really ground ourselves in that. This is our new reality. This is what is going on around us all the time. So we need to be talking about this constantly with our clients, with ourselves, with our families, and recognizing that we can design a healthy economy. We can do that. We can reprogram it. It's up to us. It's just people. We just need to make that happen, make choices. So, and for us as marketers, celebrate the healthy nature, really bring that into everything we're doing, try to engage people as citizens, as active citizens involved in this redesign, and sell those hopeful visions. So that place that you imagined at the beginning is not lost. It might be slightly different. And it's not just going to happen by itself, but it's not lost. We can still get there, and we can still get to maybe even a better version of it. The dinosaurs couldn't see the asteroid. We can because we are it. We are the asteroid. And there's a story here that we'll be the only species to ever anticipate its own extinction and still go extinct. A better story for me is that we'll be the only species to ever anticipate its own extinction and avoid it. That's a story that I want to be a part of personally. So I think if we can, let's choose to be the hope, to have the courage, to choose system change over climate change, to grasp that we can do this. We can do the system change. We can live in all the promise of those worlds that we imagined at the beginning. And that is not some kind of ideological position, that is a statement of fact. But the first thing is it takes us facing the change. So thank you and good luck.
Well, thank you very much, Paddy. That was a really informative and practical presentation as well. And I, for one, felt a definite sense of relief when you shared your last slide. So we can do this. We've had a couple of questions in. I think Ian Bates had a question. So Ian, if you'd just like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Paddy. Thank you very much for that. That was excellent and a very, very clear narrative. Not always easy to achieve on that subject. So thanks for that.
Welcome.
You have alluded to some answers to this question, but if I could just repitch it in some way. How do we change the structures that embed the skewed values? So for instance, I think a lot of people in the UK, for instance, have suddenly valued care workers on minimum wage. And we probably don't value hedge fund managers on millions quite as much. But it's the likes of the hedge fund managers who have kind of got the power, if you like. So how can we change these values fast enough to change the systems when the power sits with the world?
That's a great question. And I think the thing to recognize is that there are more of those people than there are of the hedge fund managers. They have power, but we're in a quite sort of particular moment of opportunity here, which is that our government currently is essentially not ideologically driven. It sort of drifts in the wind a bit, the wind of political opinion, public opinion. So if we can reach people and activate what is already going on in their minds about, as you just described, people valuing things differently, and surface that and get that out there, that puts pressure on our government to change what it's doing. And absolutely one of the things that we should be trying to do, and that's one of the things I absolutely agree with Extinction Rebellion about, is pushing for more participatory democracy. So more citizens' assembly type structures baked into the way we make decisions in our society for various reasons. The beauty of the citizens' assembly is that it brings people together from all sorts of different places. It gets them to have a conversation together to address all sides of the piece outside of the sort of propaganda machines that they carry around in their pockets. And it gets them to, in that process, recognize how difficult it is to make those decisions. So it actually develops empathy for people in power, which is quite interesting, and in the interest of people in power, because otherwise they're just getting attacked the whole time. And currently we have a system where we have very, very low levels of trust in our government. This is fairly obvious. So I think, yeah, it's a good question. And a lot of the work that I'm sort of privy to or getting engaged in around social change is trying to work on exactly that. How do we activate people at their level with their values, which we know are there? And how do we reach them and make sure that they are pursuing the things in their own interest and putting pressure on the power, which will respond to them in order to do that? So, yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question.
Well, yes, it does. Thank you. Interesting that we're at the bottom of the trust index along with politicians.
Who's we? Marketers.
Marketers.
Yeah. And that's that's an opportunity for us to sort of do right by them, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was a really interesting question. And I know that Julian's got a question that he'd really like to ask. Julian, I don't know if you want to ask that yourself. You're not unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I've got many questions, Paddy, but one that I've kind of picked up recently is, there seems to be quite a growing belief that economic growth or growth generally is in itself causing climate change. And we as marketers have been sort of taught that our role is to create growth, growth for companies, growth in society, growth in the economy. Do you think we just need to stop having that objective?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's a really, really controversial one in the sense that there's a wild debate going on about it at the moment. I think what matters fundamentally is why we have growth. So what is it for? What is growth there to achieve? And arguably it's there to achieve well-being and progress and people coming out of poverty and so on. So I think we need to look at it and say, well, is that what it's doing? And arguably it's not. And there's lots of sort of data points that point at that. And therefore, if it's not, well, what does it need to do instead? And how do we adjust what that growth is focused on in order to help it achieve its actual end? We've become a bit obsessed with the means and sort of forgotten about the end a little bit, it seems. But this debate around degrowth is a fascinating one. And it's very, very challenging because, I mean, one of the key principles of degrowth is not get rid of GDP completely or stop growth altogether, but it's balance it a little bit better so that those of us in the world who are, have lots of growth, but perhaps unnecessarily, can allow others in the world to have growth in a way that supports what they're doing and brings down the levels of all the problems that we're seeing. So it's a critical question. I think what I come back to is growth, yes, of what? And if we can get to a better answer for that, then we're in a good place. One of the, I think, the thing we have to do immediately is get a carbon tax. Because if we had a carbon tax, then a lot of the problem with growth goes away. A lot of the problem with growth currently is that it requires fossil fuel energy to fuel it. And so we create all these emissions in the process of growing. If we take that problem away, then maybe growth happens in a decoupled way, and that can be better, that can work better. But I think that takes all of us sort of lobbying for that, basically, and being okay with that as it comes along and helping to communicate that as it comes along and make sure that that carbon tax is not something that simply benefits those at the top, which to date has been how it's functioned or has been blocked by people who don't really want it to happen. So yeah, that's for me and many others who I'm talking to, certainly a priority. Get a carbon tax in, then growth kind of continues in a way that's less bad.
Great, thank you, Paddy. Really interesting. I think that's all we've got time for now in terms of questions as we're approaching 2 o'clock. I'm just going to share my screen quickly with your LinkedIn details in case people would like to contact you on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again for a really fantastic webinar. I mean, I've got a very long reading list to start on now. And I'm sure everyone else does as well. Just before everybody leaves for the next virtual appointment, I'd like to remind you all that we've got another webinar next week at the same time. So it's on Wednesday, the 30th of September at 1 o'clock. And it's kind of following on from the green theme. So this one is called Be Green, Not Mean, how to make corporate social responsibility campaigns profitable. So this webinar will be hosted by Martin Rich, who's a sustainable investment specialist with over 20 years of experience working in finance, both at mainstream investment banks such as JP Morgan and social investment firms. So during his time in financial firms, he recognized the need for a standardized global mechanic to understand the total impact of any investment portfolio on society and the planet. Discussing these ideas in the coffee queue with a stranger resulted in him quitting a well-paid job and co-founding a non-profit business to create the solution, which is Future Fit Business. So in this webinar, Martin will explain how you can employ practical tools that track and benchmark real measurable results from CSR initiatives in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You can find information on this and register, don't forget that it is free, on our website under our events page. So that's thenetwork1.com/webinars. I hope we'll see everyone there next week, but for now, have a lovely afternoon and goodbye.